Hey, you guys, and welcome to another episode of Table Talk. Thank you so much for joining in. If you don't know me, my name is Taylor. I'm the communications director here at Pathways, and I get the lovely privilege of interviewing and speaking with these wonderful individuals who are on Table Talk with us. And today, our topic is all about God's faithfulness. And some of you may have had experiences where you've experienced seeing God's faithfulness firsthand. Some of you may struggle with ever seen God's faithfulness, but we're going to talk to a couple who has seen God's faithfulness the entire way through their story and just how incredible that is. So we hope you're ready. I do have a little warning. We're going to be talking about some sensitive material regarding childbirth and grief. So just want to put that out there if you have to stop at any point in time or skip through, but it's going to be a great story. So hopefully you can stick with us. With that being said, I would love to pass it on to our amazing couple who's here today. TJ and Liz, how are you guys?
Doing good.
Good. Thanks for being willing to be on the podcast today.
We're excited.
Good. I know. It'll be fun. It'll be good. So you guys have quite the story.
Yeah.
And I could personally say I have not heard the story. I have just heard that it's a story. So when I approached you and asked if you've been willing to share, you were like, yeah, absolutely. We've actually done it before.
Yeah.
So this is something that you guys are willing to share and to talk about. And I really appreciate you being willing to do that. So thank you.
It's been an interesting journey, being married for 14 years and in ministry for 14 years and having the story, being a part of us and being a part of our journey and the faith that we've had and the faithfulness that God's had in our life and showed us from the very beginning of our marriage that He's going to be there with us, protecting us. So it's been a lot, but it's I've got to share it a few times, and we get to share it with our students to get them to understand the faithfulness and the love that God has for us, even in hard times. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. You say students, give us a little background about you guys really quick.
Yeah.
What you do, kind of your role at Pathways.
So we are the high school and young adult pastors. I am, and she's my wife. So just fact.
Honorary member.
That's right.
I mean, for real.
Co-captain, co-organizer.
Absolutely.
Spell checker.
Hey, necessary.
Important roles. And we've been doing student ministry for 14 years since we've been married. Starting in North Dakota, California, and Indiana, Iowa, and now here in Appleton. So
you're all over the place.
Yeah, it's been a wild whirlwind of fun. Just doing student ministry. So it's interesting now with doing high school and then now young adults. So that's a new avenue for us. So
Cool.
whole new world.
So how about you tell me where your story starts?
Yeah, so we started, we got married we lived in North Dakota, and we met on eHarmony.
That's right.
And it was a really cool thing, and it was a total God thing too. I lived in a small town in North Dakota, and this is the politically correct thing to say, there was not very many prospects.
Sure.
In a small town, and everyone would move away. And so out of a friend of ours who said, hey, you should do that. And so after a while, I thought about it. And this is a funny part of the story is we went on eHarmony, and they have like free weekends over the holidays. And I was like, I don't want to pay for this. So I did a free weekend, and then they kept sending me like 40, 50, 60, 90% off. And I was like, I could spend 90% off. I could do that. That's what love is worth, I guess.
I was just thinking that. What is it worth?
So I got 90% off for 3 months. And I was like, all right, God, I'll give you 3 months till we can find a spouse. And
you gave him a deadline.
Oh, yeah. I was only going to do a 3 months subscription. So
God loves a challenge, man.
I mean, He was all in it. And so I met Liz. So after North Dakota, we moved out to California and to be closer to my family. And after a couple of years, we found out Liz was pregnant. And we, through that whole first pregnancy, was amazing. Perfect pregnancy, right?
And so it's kind of funny. It's kind of a joke in our family because his sisters always dealt with like heartburn or, just kind of those things.
Joys of pregnancy.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. And I had none of it. I mean, nothing.
Nice.
Aside from getting bigger, you wouldn't have known I was pregnant. So it was his sisters were all mad at me, like, this
Oh,
is
yeah.
not fair.
That's not something you go around saying to people.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't tell anybody that. It's okay.
Yeah, but that's awesome that
Yeah,
it's so
it was-
comfortable for you.
yeah.
I mean, that's great.
So during the pregnancy, we were about 6 months in, and we were at the church there in California, and they were doing a women's conference. And so I was running sound for the women's conference, and Liz was there. And they were doing kind of like a prophetic thing at the end and just praying for people and speaking life over them and all this kind of stuff. And so at the very end of this conference, we're sitting in the back and we're wrapping up, and the lady comes back to us and was like, "Hey, can I pray with you guys?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure, we're done." And so she goes up to Liz and she's like, "Hey, I want to pray for you." And you know what?
Yeah. So, and I mean, it was in my mind, like at that time, it's just a generic, hey, blessings on your family, on your ministry. I had talked to her earlier. She knew she was having a boy. She was like, God has a plan for his life, which I'm like, okay, God has a plan for everybody's life, sweet.
You're like,
thanks,
thanks.
didn't think much of it at the time.
So then we both were like, "Oh yeah, cool. God's gonna have a plan for his life. He's gonna have a ministry, all this kind of stuff." And so we're like, "Okay, whatever." In the back of our head. So then go to all the birthing stuff in the hospital, and they're like, "Hey, your water won't break at home, and you'll come in and you'll have this great birth and all this kind of stuff." And
The hospital told you that?
Yeah,
so
so,
we
like-
pre-register, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you get to come to this room, and we have this tub, and you can relax and
Yeah.
do all these fun things, and just
Do all
enjoy."
these fun things before you push out a
It's like her whole thing was like, it doesn't happen like it does in the movies. Like
Right.
in the movies,
So
the water
dramatized.
breaks. And yeah, she's like, it never happens that way. You'll start having contractions. You'll call the hospital. They'll tell you to wait like an hour until you come in because,
She was trying to set you up for success
Yeah.
mentally.
yeah. And so
Okay.
then they had this like massive like hot tub like thing.
Nice.
You're supposed to be able to get in and sit in to help like relax your body.
Absolutely.
He's like, "All right, this could be great."
Yeah, this should be good. I love baths. I love hot tubs. This should be awesome.
Oh no.
Did not happen that way.
Okay, how did it
Not
happen?
at all.
Basically complete opposite of everything she said.
Stop. Like gushing water breaking, contractions right away.
Water broke before I had a single contraction.
So now that happened at home.
And that's pretty rare. That doesn't
Yeah, that's
honestly the majority of women's water does not break.
no.
And that's where the doctor, she was like, "Yeah, that doesn't happen at home."
Yeah.
So that's where the entire story starts.
Okay.
Is right there is the water broke and it was brown. And so
That's not what we want.
we're like, "Well, that's weird." And so we
Yeah.
get to the doctor and they're like, "Well, what color was it?" And Liz was like, "It was brown." So they're like, "It's probably meconium."
Yeah.
And so
For those who don't know what that is.
yeah.
So meconium is when the baby has that first poop, which is like really dark, tarry, sticky, like
Lovely.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it happens in the womb or as the baby's coming out.
It don't normally
Typically, it
happens.
doesn't happen until after they're born.
Oh, right.
That's,
Sorry. Yes.
that's their first poop. There is some have it in the womb, but it's not usually like an issue. Like it's there, but it's not usually a problem. Like that's what they told us. They're like, it's okay. Just
Mhm.
pooped a little early. It'll be fine.
Okay.
So they hook her up to machines. They got the baby's heartbeat and all that kind of stuff going on. And 16 hours later, it was a long time.
Oh,
Time we
casual.
went in.
Overnight,
Yeah.
just hanging out. Contractions were pretty normal. Everything was fine. Till the next morning, the doctor comes in and they're checking everything. And they're like, "Yeah, he's just not coming down."
Hmm.
And the doctor then asks me, he's like, "What's your hat size?" And I was like, "I don't know. It's pretty big. It's like 7 and 7/8. It's pretty large head." And
Great question to
And
ask.
he leaves.
yeah, nothing.
Oh, and then happens.
He just walks
No
up.
follow up.
So then the nurse is standing there and she looks at me. She's like, I've never heard him ask that question.
Oh,
I'm going to start prepping you for a C-section.
okay.
Yeah.
So
Had the baby dropped at that point?
Not
Like,
as-
could you tell that the baby's head had dropped?
Not like I couldn't tell, but I was on an epidural. Like,
Oh,
I wasn't
sure.
really feeling anything at that point.
Sure.
But I mean, he'd come down a little bit, but just not like into the birth canal.
Right. Was not positioned
Yeah.
where
Yeah,
it should have been
it's not
probably
coming
at
down. His head's too big.
16 hours.
Yeah.
His head is too big.
So I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
bad.
That's
That's a weird question. But again, that was a God thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They prep for the C-section. We go back there. There's in the OBOR. There's all the nurses and doctors in there.
So when you have a C-section, there's extra people. There's your set of doctors for you,
Mhm.
and then they bring in the pediatrician. They bring in all these extra people anytime they do a C-section.
Understandable.
So that was one of those, hindsight of God was putting everything in place because
Yeah.
he knew who needed to be there and not
Absolutely.
a normal birthing situation where
Yeah.
it's just your doctor and a nurse.
Right. Were you at all mentally prepared to have a C-section at this point?
I was pretty out of it, I think, at that point.
Okay. Did you mind either way? Like, did you go in with an expectation of like,
No,
okay,
I didn't.
I
Yeah, that's
think
something
that
we never
helped.
even thought about.
Yeah.
Sure.
My sisters had C-sections,
Yeah.
but then it
Okay.
wasn't like, well, this is what we have to do or anything.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's just like, well, this is what they want. So this sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and after 16 hours or whatever, or
Yeah, your
I
body's
was just kind of like,
toast
okay,
anyways.
let's just, yeah.
I would like
whatever
my
gets this
baby at
over
this
with.
point.
Yeah.
I was tired. I was,
Oh, you were?
oh yeah.
Oh, good to know. All right. So you're in the room and you're prepped and ready to go.
Yeah.
So they got Liz spread out on the table. I'm sitting up there by Liz's head with the anesthesiologist. And so it's just me and this guy, and I can't really see anything else. And so they do the C-section. The Ty has one cry and then stops breathing. And
Oh.
So yeah. So the next, like, the first thing I really hear is I'm laying on the table, right? And I'm like, okay, they're doing stuff, but I don't really know what they're doing. And then you hear code blue OBOR
Oh.
over the speaker.
You don't hear a code of anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I'm laying there and I'm like, code blue. Okay. That's not good. OBOR. That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
I'm not dying.
Right?
And so then it's like that, you go through that process and then your body seizes up and you're like, no.
Yeah.
No, no, no. And then I'm laying there and like as I'm about ready to start freaking out, I hear the lady from the conference in my head saying, God has a plan for his life. And from like
I got goosebumps.
like that was the flip of the switch. Like I was good.
Wow.
Like,
Did you feel pretty at peace in that moment?
oh yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
'Cause a lot of moms would not. A lot
Yeah.
of parents, I should say, would be like, what's happening? Why is there a
Yeah.
code?
Yeah.
so it was
Okay.
pretty crazy. The anesthesiologist was right there. So he's kind of talking us through a little bit of what's going on because we can't really tell. They take Ty over to another table and they're starting CPR and doing all this stuff. They got
Mhm.
oxygen and chest compressions and all this kind of stuff going on. And he starts to breathe again, but it's been very labored and his heart rates and everything is just kind of crazy. And so the anesthesiologist is kind of um, essentially lying to us right there, I think to try to calm my nerves. And he's like, oh, yeah, this is normal. That sounds good. Everything's good. And I'm
He
like,
really tried. And
it was so weird because then after the fact, you're like, he wasn't honest at all. But he was just trying to make sure what Liz was okay and that I was okay in that moment and that we could handle that, especially because they're sewing Liz back up, and
I mean, yeah, you just had 7 layers of yourself cut open
Yeah.
and you're laying there and you don't have any control over the situation whatsoever.
so from that moment on, they bring in extra doctors, and one of the coolest doctors there was an older guy, like a war vet that had been a
Hmm.
military doctor, and
He was like there to do some kind of like conference or training thing.
He was just in the hospitals, you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so he had this weird like World War II ventilator thing that
he wore around his
he
neck.
wore around his neck and then
Okay.
held the mask on Ty as they moved him around to take x-rays and all these crazy
Oh.
things. Yeah. So it's just another one of those like,
Mm-hmm.
God knew he had everybody. Like,
It's-
That's wild.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't understand. The crazy thing was is he doesn't realize why that he was there or like why this machine works so well as it does. But he's like, yeah, this is a great tool that we use. And he's like, yeah, this is going to work well for what we need it for right at this moment. Because they kept on doing x-rays. And so what was happening is Jude or Ty had ingested the meconium.
Mm-hmm.
And as they were sewing her back up, they're like, the meconium had stained.
the placenta.
Yeah. And
So it had been in there so
Yeah.
long in the
16 hours later.
Yeah.
well, they're like, it could have been days, it could have been weeks ago that he had this because they're like,
Oh, okay.
for that hospital, they're like, they've never seen, like, the meconium aspiration is what they call it. And usually it's when they're born and they
Yes.
take that first breath is when they inhale it.
hmm
But they're like, for Ty, it had to been a while that it was in there because it was just like his lungs were just full of it.
Wow.
And the placenta was stained with it. Like it had
Okay.
just been a long time that the meconium had been in there.
So it was a lot. And then, so that was in his lungs. And so he wasn't able to get full breaths. And so that's what was causing him not to be able to breathe. And his CO2 was rising. And so he wasn't getting enough oxygen and suffocating. So they were trying to get the medicine in his system to where it could help break it all up. And so
Okay.
nothing was working at that moment. And so this was early afternoon, and they're doing all this stuff. And the craziness of my family being there at the hospital, Liz was in the recovery room. They got Ty in the X-ray room doing other stuff, and so I'm going back and forth to Liz, to Ty, to the family, and all that kind of stuff. And I remember very vividly the nurses saying, "You need to stay with Ty. You need to stay in here."
Oh,
And
okay.
and I kept going back and forth. They're like, "No, you need to stay in here." And I
Be that
didn't realize it
presence.
why until later. They're like, "He was going to die, and you were not realizing. You didn't understand that." And they had brought in a chaplain, and they're like,
Yeah.
They were preparing for the worst.
"Yeah."
Yes.
So they were
Yeah.
expecting the worst to happen because they didn't think he was going to make it. And so,
But they didn't outrightly say that to you.
No.
not at that point. It wasn't until later that when we went
Hmm.
back, that they had mentioned those kind of things. And so in that moment, our pastor was there, and they're like, "Yeah, there's nothing else we can do here. We need to transport him to another hospital." And so we were in Truckee, California, and we were going to transfer him to Reno, Nevada. They had bigger hospitals
Hmm.
there. It was about a 45-minute drive, and they're getting ready to transport him. So he's in the incubator, and they had all the nurses and stuff, and they wheel Liz out of her recovery room, and that was the first time Liz got to see Ty in the incubator.
Yeah.
Put her hand in there, and the picture is really cool about the show.
Yeah.
And so I'm getting ready to leave with Ty to the other doctor with some of my family. So we were going to follow the ambulance over there, and Liz was going to stay there in Truckee. So it was just a weird time. Yeah.
Oh, man.
But that's where God had his hand on everything in that moment. So he's transferred to Reno, and we're there for like 2 hours. And they're like, "We are maxed out on all the ventilator stuff. We have no other options here, and we don't have the facilities to do anything else. And so we need to transfer him to a third hospital in Sacramento."
Oh, my
So
gosh. So
was-
back.
So back to California. So they're like, this was myself and our pastor and my brother and brother-in-law were all there at the hospital in Reno. And they come into the waiting room there, and they're like, "Well, you can stay here if you want and just be with him when he passes away." And I'm like, your mouth drops open and your heart sinks, and you're like, "Man, we got to try. We got to trust God that his hand is in this situation." And they're like, "It's about a 10% chance that we'll get him there in time and they'll be able to do the procedure." And I was like, "We have to try." So it was a helicopter ride because the jets weren't available. So they're like, any weather, any turbulence or anything like that, it's not going to be good. So we're like, we have to try. So they called Liz just to get authorization to
Yeah, that's a weird thing. I don't know if you understand, but like the mother has all the legal rights to the baby.
Oh, I didn't
So, like,
realize
He
that.
cannot make any decision
I
for
didn't
his
know that.
Yeah.
Even as the father.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So they had to fax me papers from Reno to Truckee and then bring him into my room for me to sign that they could put him on the transport to take him to Sacramento. Yeah.
Oh, that's wild. As you're in the middle of recovering.
Yeah.
She's drugged up.
You don't have your baby with you and all this stuff is going on.
Yeah, it's crazy. So we're like, we got to try. And so they life flight him over to Sacramento, and this is about midnight on the 18th. And
So you haven't slept
no,
No.
because you were up for 16 hours. Did you nap at all?
on the car ride, I think I fell asleep for a little bit.
Okay.
And once we got to the hospital there in Sacramento, it was my pastor and myself, and because he drove me over there,
Mm.
and they had just started the surgeries called ECMO.
Okay.
And so they took out, or they put in two uh, tubes to pump out the blood
Mhm.
and to oxygenate it and to pump it back in. And they said this would take, they could be on this machine for 7 days. And they said after 7 days, we'll know if it's working. If there's any brain
If
damage,
it's going to work.
yeah,
You won't know until after the
Yeah.
7
Right.
days.
Yeah.
So if there's any brain bleeds or
More
brain
waiting.
damage, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's waiting.
So this was, midnight. We get there. We get to sleep in the waiting room a little bit, and this was, it was just a crazy first, like 24
Mhm.
hours, which was intense.
So usually, like, you have a baby and they measure them and they weigh them and all this stuff. We did not get to weigh Ty until he was more than 24 hours old before they put him on
Right.
the scale and weighed him.
Because at that point, they didn't even, that was not a priority.
No, absolutely not. It was, we want to make sure he's going
Right.
to live. We don't care what he weighs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So he's on the ECMO the next day. I think Liz got to come out 2 days later.
yeah.
He was born.
You didn't have any further complications. You
No,
were okay.
No, my
Okay.
recovery was,
Okay.
it was one of those, like, you hear about the super moms who like lift cars and stuff. They're like, how fast I was able to get up and walk around. Cause they're like, you have to be able to go to the bathroom. You have to be able to walk for them to discharge you. And it was,
You're like,
it was
challenge
like
accepted.
48 hours. And I'm like, okay, get me out of this bed. I want to get up. I want to walk. Like,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So my mom brought Liz over to the Sacramento hospital, and we were able to see Ty there. And so just an amazing nursing hospital in the NICU there, the Sutter Hospital in Sacramento. And the nurses and all the people there were just amazing. And so 24 hours after all that, they're like, yeah, things are looking good. He's got color, and the prognosis was good.
Because they said when they brought him in from the life flight to start surgery, he was gray,
Yeah.
which essentially means all of your organs are shutting down.
Mhm.
But the God part of that whole um, being with us and being with Liz was still in Sacramento or in Truckee,
Yep.
Mhm.
and our pastor's wife came in, right?
So in all the chaos of like they're moving him, all this stuff, my pastor's wife comes in to see me. Before she came into the room, the nurses told her, they're like, okay, she's calm. We're not sure how much she understands. Don't say anything that's going to make her, freak out, go crazy. And
Oh, yeah.
they're like, we don't want to have to sedate her. And they're like, so right now she's fine. She's like, so she comes into the room like all gingerly and like, like walking on eggshells, almost literally. And she walks up to the bed. She goes, hey, Liz, how you doing? I'm like, I am fine. And she just,
She's like, what?
what? And I looked at her, I'm like, Stacy, you were there. But I can't remember her name. But anyway, whoever was the speaker, she's like, she said God had a plan for his life.
So when you
God-
meant you were fine, you were actually fine.
I was fine. Like that piece you talk about. Because I was like,
Mhm.
my reasoning was, okay, God said he has a plan for his life. He has to be alive for him to have a plan. That's what hit me in that moment when I was laying there and I heard that and I'm like, he's good.
Oh man, say that
God-
again. Say that again.
Which part?
In order for him to
If
have
God had a plan for his life, he had to be alive in order for that plan to be fulfilled. And so it was just that rock solid reassurance that I don't care what you tell me about he's going through 10% chance, 5% chance. I don't care. He has a plan. Therefore, he's going to make it. And that was like, I was good. Like you
Yeah.
said, that piece that,
Yeah. surpasses understanding.
yes, exactly. Like I had
You
that in that
experienced
moment.
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
That's amazing.
it was intense, but I was like, and that was part of my whole recovery thing too, is like, get me out of here so I can go be with him
right.
because he's going to make it.
Yep.
And yeah. That was,
Wow.
That was the reassuring thing when she was able to tell me those things and remind me even
Mm-hmm.
the powerful those words were, that gave me the reassurance and the peace to have, because we were like, man, what's going to happen, all this kind of stuff, and just to have her peace and her understanding of everything was going on, and to have that was just amazing.
Yeah.
'Cause otherwise you're like, man, you want to be strong, you want to be like
Mhm.
confident and stuff, but then to have your partner, your wife, spouse to be that that rock as well was super awesome
Absolutely.
and just amazing to have, because in that moment, you're just like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have any answers. You can't do anything. You're
Totally
literally
not in
just
your
watching
control.
everything unfold. And so it was pretty intense. The cool part of that is the nurses there, going back to that, were just amazing. There was two nurses 24/7 with Ty. One was keeping his vitals good, and the one lady was just watching, or man, was watching the ECMO machine. They sat in this cool rocking chair, and they just watched the machine. That's all they did for
That was their
12
job.
hours.
Yeah.
That's
Make sure.
So they can develop blood clots super easy.
sure.
So they like literally had a flashlight on the tube and they would check it to make sure there were no clots going back in.
It's an important job. That's a
Yeah.
big deal.
Yeah.
And I couldn't imagine just the stress of watching that
Mhm.
machine. They were constantly wiping it down to make sure there's no bacteria or anything like that. And
Yeah.
12 hours just charting everything. And so these people were rock stars. And
Yeah.
so 6 days of that,
Yep.
they started weaning him off the ECMO.
And you were there at that point?
Yep.
Yes, I was there at that point.
Yep.
But
Okay.
that was another one of those like God milestones, was because there were like 7 days before we know anything.
Yeah.
Day 6, they were getting ready to take him off.
Oh,
They're like, he's
man.
doing great. And so just from that moment of, they're like, yeah, everything is looking good. Everything is where it needs to be. And so then it was, okay, now we're going to try to wean him off and then check for, EKGs and brain stuff
Mhm.
like that. I'll make sure everything is good. And just every milestone after that was, yeah,
Yeah.
everything is great. From feeding to uh, no brain damage or anything like that, from no
Yeah.
oxygen, and everything that they asked him to do, he
Mhm.
was able to accomplish that.
Yeah. Every
Oh my
every
gosh.
milestone they set for him, he did it in like half the time because they were like, you'll be here minimum if he survives through the
Mhm.
ECMO. They're like minimum 6 weeks.
Wow.
End of 6 weeks, we were going home.
Yeah.
You're like, peace out.
Yeah.
That's
It's
amazing.
Yeah.
every time we would go in there, he was, being able to be held. And one time we went in there and he's sitting in a bouncer seat on the floor.
He's got like this little smile. It was so cute.
And so you walk into the NICU and you have all these preemie babies and
Yeah.
all this stuff going on. And then Ty,
So
he's the big baby.
so I said they didn't weigh him until he was 24
Yes.
hours old.
Yep.
So typically a baby will lose 10% of their body weight in the first
Mhm.
24 hours. Okay.
Yep.
So even with all the trauma he went through, when they weighed him, he weighed 9 pounds, 2 ounces. So you had literally
Oh
looked
my
like a giant
gosh.
monster baby in this NICU of preemies that are like a pound.
Wow.
It was funny.
So seeing him even on a bouncer seat on the floor and just
Mhm.
hanging out, and he's got oxygen and stuff going still. And
What a
but
champ.
yeah,
Yeah.
Seriously.
so I know this is funny to me, but the interesting thing is they had to wean him off the morphine. And
Yeah.
so, and I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, the nurse is like, yeah, he's really attached to the morphine. He really likes that. I was like, well, yeah, who doesn't like
Yeah.
morphine?
I was
Yeah.
gonna say.
I mean, you
Yeah.
give everybody that.
Very addictive.
And so that was, they're like, yeah, that's the hardest thing we got to deal with right now, is to wean him off, because he gets agitated when he's off of it. So I'm like, yeah, he's been on
God
it for
forbid.
a
Yeah.
couple weeks here. Um,
And as a newborn, you can't really explain that to
Yeah.
them.
like,
So,
give me the drugs.
Well, and then the real funny thing is like, so babies like pacifiers, right?
yep.
So they had to dip Ty's pacifier into sugar water to get him to take it. And they needed him to take the pacifier so he would start to learn how
That
to,
motion.
yeah, to suck on it, because he had a feeding tube for the first, week, 2 weeks.
That
before he-
makes sense because I
Yeah.
know they start swallowing and doing movements in the womb,
Yeah.
but I suppose if you don't have that first 24 hours of
Yeah.
latching and learning, whether it's a bottle or from the
Yeah.
breast, but they have to be able to learn that somehow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And he didn't want to
fascinating.
take the pacifier, so they had to dip it into sugar water to get it and take the
I was like,
pacifier.
I don't want it. This isn't real.
Creative though. So he eventually was able to do it.
Yes. And then he didn't want to give it up until he was like 3 years old.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
He's a pacifier baby. It's okay. It's okay. The interesting too was God provided, I don't know, like the Ronald McDonald House.
Oh, yeah.
It's an amazing facility.
Yep.
And great place for families to be at in those moments. And the cool part was for us, knowing our faith and knowing our journey, being able to talk with parents and families in the Ronald McDonald House, because everyone has their own little room, but there's
Yeah.
big community areas and lunch or dinners and stuff like that. And to be able to share our faith with other people that were also there because their kids were at the, needing treatment or whatever. And everybody that we got to talk to, they're like, "Well, how are you guys doing?" We're like, "We're doing good." God's amazing. And so be able to share those moments and Ty's testimony with other people was something that we're like, man, this is a crazy thing. But we didn't quite understand all of that,
Mhm.
until you get into that moment. You don't understand why or how God's going to use those things for His glory. But in those moments, we were to share. Or even we were one time in the hospital waiting room, and somebody came in. We were able to talk with them and share our story a little bit, and just God's faithfulness and God's hand on our kid, and be able to share our faith
Yeah,
in those moments to other
Yeah.
people.
that's
Which is
amazing.
wild to be able to do, because you're like, man, I'm never gonna get those moments. But so all through that, and then even be able to share our testimonies with the nurses,
Mhm.
because you get to know them really well.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
I mean, they are
Yeah.
your best buds,
Yeah.
your safety net for a lot of things.
and we had one nurse who we loved, and so we asked the head nurse. We're like, hey, can we just have that nurse? She's like, "Yeah, sure, fine." And so she was like, yeah, that'd be great. She's like, I love Ty. And so we got to talk with her every day for like a month,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
it's
just
quite the relationship.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it was really cool. We were able to bless her with a card, and like a
Mhm.
Starbucks gift card after at the end. And we're like, man, we just want to thank you for everything. It's such
Yeah.
a sweet lady. It's such a cool uh opportunity to have with somebody
Yeah.
special there doing that. So
That's amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
Can I back up a little bit?
yeah.
Do you think the nurses understood the peace you were feeling at all?
Oh no. There's no way. Because like I said, when Stacy came in, they were like, don't
Mhm.
upset her. Don't
That's what I was
they were
wondering.
not grasping that like the assurance that I had.
Yeah.
Like, and it's funny because like I remember as soon as I came out of the operating room, went back to my room, the only thing I wanted was my phone
Yeah.
to play worship music. And they were like, what are you
Oh,
doing? Like they just they
Yeah.
were not comprehending that I knew everything was okay. And
yeah. No, I just always think of the fact of when people think of God's faithfulness, they think specifically in their life, but they don't think about how their actions in their life are also affecting other people. So, like, just by you having that peace could have planted a seed of like the nurses asking questions of like,
Oh.
why is she the way that she is and why is she different?
Yeah.
so the nurse that I had in Truckee, the one
Mhm.
that's like, I'm gonna prep you for a C-section when he asked about the
Yeah.
hat size. So when we had Ty's first birthday party, we invited her. And she brought her teenage son to his party.
Oh, she came.
And she came and she's like, this is the miracle baby that I told you
Oh
about.
my
Like, and
gosh.
these are the parents that were like it was
I have chills.
yeah, it was crazy to see how, even just that little bit
Yeah.
was already God using Ty's life to
To
show
touch other people
yeah.
and to show God's faithfulness and
Yeah.
love in that moment.
So because when we left Sacramento to go back home, we actually stopped at the Truckee Hospital.
Yeah.
And we were able to
Took 'em in.
show them Ty, and
That's
after
awesome,
that 4
yeah.
weeks and stuff, and we were able to introduce them to Ty, healthy, and they're like, most people that have a traumatic experience at a hospital do not go back,
Yeah,
and they don't want to
right.
relive that traumatic experience. And we're like, man, this is a joyous experience for us, and we got to see God's hand to move in those things, and we wanted to share that with you. And so that's where we talked to her and said, hey, we got her name and information and stuff, and we are able to invite them to his first birthday party and stuff like a year later. So
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
incredible.
yeah, and so to be able to
So
share that
good.
with them, and we actually went back there a couple different times to just to let them know, like, hey, Ty's doing great,
Good.
and Ty didn't have any issues or problems. And uh, continuing on, like 6 months later,
Yeah.
we went to a specialist. We had to do some follow ups and stuff because they wanted to make sure everything was okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the doctors was like a psychologist, a specialist that talked with just Liz and I
Yeah.
about PTSD and all this kind of stuff. And
Well,
we
I
go,
mean, you had a traumatic experience. You
did.
really did at the end of the day. So, like, what does
Right.
that look like for that
Yeah.
and healing?
So we went in there and she was asking all these questions, and we're like, we're good.
You're like, no, I really am.
We're
Like,
like,
I'm not lying.
And she
I
was like,
really am.
are you sure? And so we got to share with her the entire story, how God's hand was on every situation,
Yeah.
from the very beginning in the womb to after birth, that God's hand was there guiding and directing the nurses, the doctors, and everybody and the peace that we had, that God gave us, that again, nobody understood. Even the
Right.
psychologist, she's like, this isn't normal. People come in here and we got to like talk about it. And, we're like, I don't know what you want us to tell you, but
Yeah.
I mean, God's got it. We're good. And she just didn't understand, which was weird. But we were able to just explain to her like the story that Ty had, and that God's given us the peace, and uh, don't quite always understand what you go through, or why you go through it, or why the struggle or anything like that. But then after, but yeah, and then there's moments in there like we cried. We had
Absolutely.
we had uh, seasons of just not quite understanding some things, but yeah. But God was faithful in all of it, and to be able to share that with the doctors and nurses and family and church family and our own family and people that were our extended family in our lives, to be able to share that God did amazing things in
Yeah.
his life, in our lives, and then to be able then to share that testimony, because
Yeah.
now he's
Gonna be 12.
Oh man.
You know?
perfectly normal, perfectly healthy, stubborn, but
12-year-old.
yeah, he's a
Yeah.
preteen.
He's a preteen. Oh, that's fun.
So yeah, God's been faithful. So
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for being willing to share. I mean, what a huge part of your testimony, and honestly, Ty's
yeah,
testimony,
Ty's testimony.
which he probably doesn't remember that
Not all,
aspect,
yeah.
which is fine. That's good. But still a huge part of
Yeah.
who he is, and seeing God's hand in his life, literally
Yeah.
being right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he has a little scar on his neck to remind us of what he went through, reminds him what he went through and what God did,
Yeah.
and be able to share his story, and then for him to know it, and the pictures to show what God did in his life, and how God used, you know, a terrible situation, sickness, to spread faith and joy, and hope, and faithfulness to a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your story can resonate with a lot of people. I mean, you did have an awesome pregnancy leading up to
Mhm.
all of that,
Yeah.
but I just think of the moms and the parents who already know in advance of like, hey, there may be complications, like just preparing almost for the worst
Yeah.
in some situations, and knowing that at the end of the day, God has a plan,
Yeah.
and just whatever that looks like for that child's story and
Right.
for them. But thanks just for being willing to share all of that.
It's been awesome. We love sharing it. And then obviously for parents or families that go through anything like that, that need extra help or need extra uh, reassure, encouragement, that's one of
Mhm.
those things that, as not only just student pastors, but just people, that have gone through those things, that, man, we love to talk with people or to be with people that need that extra stuff. And
Yeah.
it's just a great side ministry, different, things that God has allowed us to be able to do. So
Absolutely. Yeah, if you're listening or watching with us and you have any questions or comments or want to share a similar story, please do. We'd love to hear it. I'm sure TJ and Liz, like they said, they're more than happy to talk with you guys about it. But I mean, sharing stories makes community,
right.
and it helps people grow, and it helps bring them together, and it helps show the hand of God in every situation. So thank you guys again for joining us today and being on the podcast. Thank you guys for listening or watching with us. We hope you can stop in for the next one, and we'll see you later.